Hey, my name is Samuel, and what's happening to me is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. The restaurant I work at is haunted, and it's not the kind of haunting that makes you question whether it's real. No, it's the kind that pulls you into the heart of something dark, something evil, that you can't escape. It all started like any other day. I was walking to work one early morning, the streets still dark, save for the pale glow of streetlights casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. I checked my phone, 6:30 a.m., the same routine I follow every single day. I prefer my life to be simple, no frills, no excitement, just the same old grind. It suits me. I'm not much of a social guy, no friends to speak of, no relationship to complicate things. I go to work, come home, watch some TV, maybe read a book, and that's about it. As I reached the restaurant, everything seemed normal. It's a small place, nothing fancy, and most of the regulars are locals. You know the type: truckers, construction workers, and families passing through on road trips. I've been working here as a chef for almost 2 years, and I keep to myself. The rest of the staff chat, laugh, gossip about whatever's happening in town, but I prefer to stay out of it. I'm not there to make friends, just to do my job and leave. I went inside, changed into my uniform, and washed my hands. The kitchen always smells the same, a mix of grease, cleaning chemicals, and yesterday's leftovers. I got to work prepping for the day ahead, chopping vegetables, seasoning meat, and setting the stoves. The restaurant was still closed, so the place was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the low rumble of the extractor fans. But then, something strange happened. It was my break time, and I headed to the back of the kitchen to step outside for a smoke. The back door, the one leading out to the alley, wouldn't open. I tried jiggling the handle, pushing my weight against it, but it was stuck. I frowned. It had never jammed before, and I'd been through that door 1,000 times without a problem. Then out of nowhere, the door flew open by itself. It slammed against the wall with such force that I jumped back, nearly dropping my cigarette. I stared at the open doorway, feeling the cold morning air sweep in. My heart was racing, but I told myself it was just the wind. Maybe it had caught the door just right, I reasoned. Still, it didn't sit right with me. I stepped outside, lit my cigarette, and tried to shake off the weird feeling creeping up my spine. The alley behind the restaurant is usually quiet, but today it felt different, darker, almost oppressive, like something was watching me from the shadows. I smoked quickly, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. And then I hurried back inside, grateful to be back in the warmth of the kitchen. The rest of the day went by as usual, or so I thought. But right before my shift ended, another strange thing happened. I was cleaning up, getting ready to leave, when I walked through the dining area and tripped over a chair. Except it wasn't just any chair. It had been tucked neatly under a table just moments before. I'm certain of it, but now it was out in the middle of the aisle, right in my path. I hit the floor hard, the shock of the fall vibrating through my bones. I looked up at the chair, heart pounding in my chest. I know what I saw. No one was around, and I hadn't heard the chair move. It was just there, waiting for me. I stood up, brushed myself off, and glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But the restaurant was empty. I was the last one there. The silence felt thick, like the air itself was pushing down on me. I shook my head, trying to clear the unease, and quickly grabbed my things. I was out of there in seconds, but as soon as I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I replayed the events in my head over and over. The door, the chair. It was more than just a coincidence. It felt intentional, like something was trying to get my attention. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt compelled to go back. It was stupid, I know. But that night, after pacing around my apartment for hours, I grabbed my phone, threw on my coat, and headed back to the restaurant. The streets were deserted, and by the time I reached the restaurant, it was past midnight. The place looked different in the dark. The windows were black, the interior swallowed by shadows. Even the sign above the door seemed to fade into the gloom. I stood outside for a moment, staring at the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, like 1,000 unseen eyes were focused on me from the darkness inside. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, go home, and forget about it. But I couldn't. Something was pulling me in. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the faint smell of grease and disinfectant lingering in the air. The kitchen was still and silent, the faint echo of my footsteps the only sound. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The place looked different at night, almost sinister. The once familiar kitchen now felt like a maze of looming shadows. I moved slowly through the dining area, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence. The feeling of being watched intensified with every step. I could feel eyes on me, but no matter how many times I turned around, there was no one there. I was alone, or at least that's what I tried to tell myself. Suddenly, I heard it. A loud crash came from the kitchen, the unmistakable sound of a plate shattering against the floor. My heart leaped into my throat, and for a moment I stood frozen, my mind racing. My flashlight flickered for a second, then steadied. I gripped my phone tighter, the light trembling as I pointed it toward the kitchen door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing eerily in the empty restaurant. No response. I slowly made my way toward the kitchen, each step feeling heavier than the last. My pulse was pounding in my ears, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. As I reached the doorway, I stopped, listening for any sound. There was nothing, just silence. I stepped into the kitchen, the beam of my flashlight sweeping across the floor. There, on the ground, was a broken plate, shards scattered across the tiles. I frowned. No one else should have been here. The back door was still locked, and I hadn't heard any other sounds except for the crash. I bent down to inspect the shards, trying to make sense of what I was seeing when I heard it. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. Humming. The sound was so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. But no, it was there, just on the edge of my hearing. A soft, melodic tune, like a child humming a lullaby. The sound seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My blood ran cold. I stood up, my heart hammering in my chest. The humming grew louder, more distinct, as if it was coming closer. I swung my flashlight around, scanning the room, but there was no one there. Then, as quickly as it started, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was worse, thick, suffocating, and filled with the anticipation of something terrible about to happen. And then I heard it. A scream. A high-pitched, blood-curdling scream that pierced the silence like a knife. It was so loud, so raw, that I instinctively clamped my hands over my ears. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my trembling hand as I searched for the source of the sound. But there was no one there. Panicked, I bolted for the door. But when I reached it, it wouldn't open. I yanked on the handle, twisting and pulling with all my strength, but it was stuck, just like before. My breathing grew frantic, my mind racing. The scream had stopped, but the air was thick with a sense of impending doom. I turned around, my back pressed against the door, and that's when I saw her. A little girl standing in the middle of the dining room, bathed in a faint ghostly glow. Her hair was tangled and dirty, her clothes torn and stained. But what froze me in place were her eyes, or rather, the empty, black voids where her eyes should have been. She stared at me, her head tilted to the side, her lips curled into a twisted smile. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and I could see bruises and cuts covering her arms and legs. She looked like she had been hurt, badly. "Daddy hurt me," she whispered, her voice soft and broken. "Can you help me?" I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed by fear, my entire body frozen in place as I stared at her. She took a step closer, her bare feet silent on the floor. "Daddy hurt me," she repeated, her voice barely audible. I tried to move, tried to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. And then she was gone. One second she was standing in front of me, and the next she vanished, leaving nothing but the cold, oppressive silence in her wake. The door behind me suddenly creaked open, and I didn't waste a second. I bolted out of there, running faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't stop until I was halfway home, my lungs burning, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got home, I locked every door, every window, and collapsed onto my couch. I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't get her voice out of my head. "Daddy hurt me. Can you help me?" The next morning, I called the police. I didn't know what else to do. I told them everything. The strange occurrences, the little girl, the feeling that something terrible had happened in that restaurant. At first, they were skeptical, probably thinking I was some paranoid guy losing his mind. But something in my voice must have convinced them, because they agreed to check it out. Later that day, they found her. Hidden in the walls of the restaurant, behind layers of brick and plaster, was the body of a little girl. She had been dead for years, her body mummified and decayed beyond recognition. The discovery rocked the entire town. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. The restaurant's owner, my boss, had a daughter. She went missing years ago, and no one ever found out what happened to her. Until now. It was him. He killed her, and then he hid her body in the walls of the restaurant. How long had she been there crying out for help? How many nights had she haunted those walls, waiting for someone to find her? I quit the next day. I couldn't go back to that place, not after what I had seen. But the thing is, I still can't get her voice out of my head. "Daddy hurt me. Can you help me?" And every night when I close my eyes, I see her, standing at the foot of my bed, her empty black eyes staring right through me.